goal for release 11.3 was to introduce technology so we could roll out the work we're doing regardless of MASA or not. Now it's MASA work, now we have additional programmers. So you don't see a lot of changes in 11.3, but there are a lot under the hood, so I put this picture together. And I realized, I don't want you to get the impression that this change is only limited to crop audit. What I'm about to talk about drill down applies to every report that you do drill down on into crop audit data, whether it's in Smart Feeder or Transaction Plus. So say you're on a report, you want to drill down and pull up the chemical screen. In the old code, you went to a library that was named CA Edit 5. The real imaginative crop audit is CA. So, and you also would, in the VB6 code, go get your data. So to prepare for the migration, we've now got this more complicated structure over here, which is already in the code. So you're talking to a COMD LLL that's going to talk to the actual .NET code that reads the data. And we're using .NET code to read the crop audit data in 11.3. We haven't migrated it to the database yet, but we are using .NET code. In the same way, we have this CA Edit 5 11.3, which is .NET code. It's a placeholder right now. It's not implemented, but when we get to the screens, you'll see what it will be doing. It'll be the new implementation of the crop audit setup screens. So we put all this plumbing in place so that we can gradually migrate things. Now with MASA, we'll be able to do things a little bit faster. There's a lot of technical challenges in getting that set up, so I want to point out we didn't have any problems in this release with that setup. All of that stuff works and works very reliably. The one problem we did have is if you had a brand new PC and you never installed anything else on it but FBS, we were missing a C++ library. So that's in our install script for the next release, but we didn't have it in the current release. We also did a database upgrade in 11.3. There we tried to address some issues. We know we had some duplicate accounts. We had duplicate vendors. We had duplicate alt IDs in both vendors and accounts. And the upgrade went through and fixed that without really asking anyone to do anything. So if you had two vendors with the same name, we'd look at the city. So if you've noticed you had a vendor and you had 5 copies of it in your data, which there was data like that, you now have one, which is the regular name, and the others have the city name appended after it. That's important to us because when you refer to a vendor out of Transaction Plus detail, out of the individual transactions, it's by name. So it needs to refer to one vendor so that we know what vendor record we're pulling data from. And we added some things to the database to enforce the single vendor constraint so we don't get them in there again. More importantly for our migration, we went through and if you look at the file structure on the disk, you'll see that we have TAD, whatever your farm name is, 16, 17, 18. We have one file per year. What the migration did was embed in those files the actual year. There's a date in there, it's the entry date, but we have entries sometimes in the file that are from a different year. And it's important that we have the actual year that is on the file itself because the control numbers in Transaction Plus start over every year. The reason is because we want the .NET code to be able to look at it this way so that when it's dealing with the data, it looks to it like it's 2016, 17, and the control numbers start over again. So the reason we're doing that is for performance. When we load the data today, we read these files sequentially, and we read them one record at a time in small bytes. We're going to take big gulps and create that table, which should speed things up. So that's kind of the stuff you didn't see that we did. We did have some unexpected issues. I hate being right. Our VB6 code is old, and so one of our hosting vendors' antivirus software decided it was a virus, so we had to find a new hosting vendor. Then that piled on with the fact that some of our Windows installations, we don't know why, we can't duplicate it. They put today's date on the files when they're installed instead of the date that's on the installation media. And that causes us a problem when we patch. So if you've noticed that there's big patches, it's because we're going out and manually updating the dates on our patches to today so that we can make sure you get the current set of patches. On Compass, in particular, we've had the problem. There's two third-party controls we use when we run scanner. You're going to see a new FBS scanner in the next release. PDFU and Adobe Acrobat don't work together too well, and occasionally they'll hang, and that's what causes that problem. And then when we were doing the work above to maintain backward compatibility, we used some code from the old FBS 10.5. We knew it was slow. On your installation, you probably won't notice it, but for some reason on Compass, it runs much slower. Has something to do with something. But when we benchmark it on our PCs, it runs significantly faster. So that we fixed in some patches, except we have another patch that's going up that should fix it for the centers file. And if you noticed on Compass that FBS is slow starting up, that's the reason why. So when that patch goes in, it should return to its original speed. The MASA impact on development. So we added a new developer in June, or in May, summer intern in June, have another developer that starts this week. FBS will ship the annual CD in 2019. I was thinking that MASA members would receive additional distribution-only digital releases. But in our discussions yesterday, which helps us in development, we'd like to not have so many releases that we get bogged down supporting releases and generating releases. So in our discussions, we're going to have MASA members get previews, which may or may not work particularly well in terms of being fully debugged, but they'll be able to evaluate the new features, the migrated code, and they'll do it in a sandbox environment on a copy of their data, not on the real data. So they can play around and give us feedback on the work we're doing. So what's coming in 11.4? You're going to probably hear this quite a lot in the next year or two, which is when we fix something, we're going to want to fix it in the .NET version, which is not to say we won't fix something that's broken, but if it's more of an enhancement, in this case, rather than try and figure out how to get new common controls and stuff to work with the old VB6 version of Scanner, we just moved Scanner to the head of the migration list. So you're going to get the .NET version of Scanner in 11.4. And actually, on a Compass where this was a performance issue, we've already moved out in everything but Scanner. Everything that displays an invoice, there's a new PDF viewer control. And we're going to use that control in Scanner. And that'll be our general approach. Obviously, we'll make exceptions as we need to, but if there's a significant change we need to make, we're going to try and make it in the .NET code. We're not going to save little Greg from fixing Packer every time somebody changes an interface file, which is a frequent occurrence for us. So we'll still be doing work on the VB6 side. We're going to have a new patch process. We're going to get rid of the timestamp issue that we've had. It's going to be based on file version numbers. We've added Windows event tracing calls, which again is under the hood. You may not care too much, but it'll enable us, if we have other performance issues, to use some Windows tools to monitor those and get counts as to where the code's slow if there's a slowdown. Another issue that we found was, because we have both VB6 and .NET code, sometimes they disagree on what your system configuration is. We had a few instances of that. So we're going to have the VB6 programs load the configuration information from .NET, so they'll stay in sync. You won't have a mysterious problem where, like, your user file is being updated in one place by VB6 and another place by .NET, which happened to us. We were going to ship 11.5 by year end, but as I said, we're going to do preview releases. So that's probably, we'll see 11.5 in that time frame. I put a slide in here to show you an example of what the scanned invoice display looks like. It's got this ribbon control across and then the invoice here. So that's what Scanner is how it's going to be displaying the invoices going forward. Yeah.
Nothing you've done that would allow ScanSnap to be used.
To what?
ScanSnap.
In terms of?
Being able to integrate it with the scanning program.
It will be in 11.4.
It will?
Yes. We're going to, whoops. This view will be in Scanner when you pull up an invoice. It'll be there. The reason it's not there now is because the way we fitted this into existing VB6 code, it had to be the entire form, and in the Scanner program it's not. There's other controls on there, so it wasn't particularly feasible for us to change it. Here we just migrated one form and put in some special code to launch it. So that's part of the reason why Scanner is going to .NET first, so that we can get this control onto it. All right, so we're going to skip 11.5 because I think the plan is you'll see this at some point. But again, we're not going to try and do full releases to MASA members at this point in January. So instead, we'll give them a preview in a sandbox type of environment. This is what the new chemical setup screen looks like. The green theme can be changed easily, in case anybody doesn't like green, but if people like green, that's the green theme we have right now. I'm trying to make it a little more intuitive and a little more modern with the toolbar across the top with icons and descriptions and a little charm kind of button like you have on your cell phone that pops down lists of tasks. This is what the chemical report will look like. You notice it looks a lot like the changes we're making to the scanner. That's because it uses a similar display control. So you'll be able to preview your reports in this mode and then print them from there. And you can also export the data. Not seeing the button up there. No, it's right there. So you can also export the data from here.
Martin, if you export the data, does it come out with some type of, well, first of all, what format are available to export it?
Here it's PDF. In other words, it's visual. It's not. You're wanting a spreadsheet.
Tabular,
Yeah, tabular. We have some ideas about reports and tabular data that when we're working on a report that we'll sandbox so folks can see it. What we're thinking is that you can get, and this would be a good priorities kind of question. We've had requests in the past for people who'd like to be able to watermark the report, put their logo behind on the paper, make it prettier than our regular reports.
So are you still going to be able to drill from the reports? The PDF?
You'll be able to drill, yes. The idea we're kicking around is drilling from here because it could be more graphical, would be more problematic. But the tabular displays you're used to seeing today and drilling from, those you can still drill from. They just wouldn't, when you go to print, the actual formatting would be here. So we'll have to get some feedback on how well that works. There's some higher end reporting tools. This reporting tool is included in the GUI toolkit we use. There's some higher end tools that you can drill from the actual picture if you want to. I think I'm at the end. No, metrics. It's really of interest to the MASA folks, but we keep track of our projected completion date. Well, this is the planned line. This is the actual line, and then this is the projected line. This is our current staffing projection. This is the planned staffing projection. So the reason this line is up here is because we've been late getting our third programmer. We had a guy hired, but he was a foreign national. He decided it wasn't a good time for him to return to the United States, so he didn't come to show up at the 1st of June like we were expecting. But MASA will be tracking that and some other metrics to make sure we stay on schedule. It's not, I'm expecting, right now we're not doing anything to differentiate these screens. So everyone will be seeing stuff like this on the chemical setup screen and so on. It's important to us to maintain a single code base. We don't want to have two copies of FBS. So I think the primary difference from a technical perspective, can't tell you from a marketing MASA perspective, but from a technical perspective, the big dividing line for us is Access versus SQL Server. So the current plan is to have MASA have the SQL Server version and have the Access version for other FBS customers. And the primary difference is performance and reliability. So if you ask Microsoft, they'll tell you if you really want to run 24/7, you don't want to be on Access. If you're happy to run 8 to 5, or you can take downtime, you can back up your database, preferably every day, but at least every week. Then Access you can get by with for a relatively small number of people. But if your organization is going to grow to large numbers of people and you're going to need a database up all the time, then you're going to have to go to a database like SQL Server. Any questions?
So is the existing conversion basically taking the existing code and just making it work?
Yes and no. We have existing code we run through a migration process. For example, we're not keeping the database design exactly the same. We're trying to modernize the database design. A good for instance will be one of the problems that we've seen is an account gets deleted or a chemical gets deleted, and then somebody runs a report and the report numbers are goofy for some reason. Well, and we dig into it, and it's because on some line of the report is now referring to a non-existent chemical or a non-existent account, and the logic didn't handle it very well or whatever. So the work we've done already, what we've done is you can still delete things, but they don't really go away. So the reports can still refer to them and run correctly.
So for example, like the use of the web centers or the OHAT tables, they'll stay in place?
Well, we'll have to work out how you see what's not there but there. But the idea is, at least when you run a report against data that it was there when you originally did it, it'll still show up because it won't have been removed from the database. But we don't plan on making it visible in the user interface.
I was going to say simplify as much as that you can.
Yeah. So, but that's just a small example. We're changing. I talked about this last year. We're changing how we are storing the fields numerically. BB6 constrained us to fairly limited precisions, like 4 points after the decimal point, if we were going to use exact calculations, or we had to go to floating point calculations, which have rounding errors. So we can use in the .NET code a 28-digit number with 12 digits after the decimal point, 16 before. So that'll give us a lot more accurate calculations and avoid some rounding errors we see, things like that. We're also looking at internally making the data such that another web application that wanted to access it would see something it's more used to. So we're generating some unique keys using a specific technology so that they'll get very long looking identifiers that they could also generate on their system and insert in our database without any conflicts. Because it's a standard that people can generate numbers independent of each other and they don't collide. So that should alleviate some data mapping issues, because it'll be easier just to take their data if they provide that key and stick it in our database.
Can you explain why you're starting with crop audit rather than transmission loss?
Well, FBS is kind of intertwined. So integration is a good thing, and sometimes it's a bad thing. So transaction plus refers to everything else. Smart Feeder refers to both Crop Audit and Transaction Plus. Crop Audit refers to Transaction Plus, but it's fairly constrained. What it really refers to is the detail table, which in any scenario we'd have to address. So we started with Crop Audit because for us it was the simplest place to start and allows us to get our feet wet, understand what's going on there, have a piece that we can deliver. I know there's issues in Transaction Plus. One of the things that we're doing, as I said, we're not taking the database straight across. So in Crop Audit right now, within Crop Audit, there's no header detail concept. There's no natural, here's an activity in the field that's composed of several things. If you're going to do that, you have to use a macro. And there's no natural, just enter several items, several activities, as you know. I drove my tractor pulling this piece of equipment. If you enter it manually in Crop Audit today, it's going to be multiple entries from our perspective. The only way to get it to be one entry is to use a macro. And actually that's how the Conservice interface works. Behind the scenes, when we get a multi-line transaction from Conservice, we write it into the database as if it were a macro. So we're going to go back and create an explicit header so that we can have true multi-line entries. The other thing is, because of the heritage from the DOS days, the code's written to run in small memory, not a lot of memory, and so it tends to reuse fields for different things. So if you wanted to query the database, you have to understand that some fields, depending upon some other values, contain different things, which is not particularly good for modern tooling. You really like to say, this column is moisture, and this column is hours, not to have a moisture/hours column. So we're going to identify those instances and add additional columns so that it's an easier database to extract data to and from using tools.
Are you going to run on like Azure, SQL, or what's your platform?
Initially, and this is where we're really reusing the VB6 parts, when we run it through the migration tool, what we get is a .NET Windows Form application. So we're not trying to change that part of it. We're staying a desktop app, at least initially. So if you were to run SQL Server the way we're currently set up, you use a file server today with the access MDB files on the file server. The natural replacement would to put a SQL server in, even run it on that server box. So we could go, I've got various scenarios we've talked about, but we could go to a hosted solution. This is something Microsoft is trying to offer large enterprise customers, but it would probably work as well, as to where you have individual desktops in the cloud and you can have a server in the cloud. Or at that point, instead of having a SQL server, you could use Azure's SQL service. But it would still be a desktop app at that point, and you would be accessing it through a remote terminal.
So you're not using like a Citrix gateway or anything like that?
Well,
Query.
terminal server works like that, so we're not make any changes specifically to support Citrix at this point. Yeah.
The framework we could present to the
Yeah.
web.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
I heard somebody asked about divisional reporting today, and so in the past, when we tried to key in divisional codes, they hung up, and so we could get focus division entries.
Okay.
Was that cleaned up a little bit with the new migration, or the?
Well, if that's an ongoing issue now, I'm hoping Sarah knows about it, because that's something we probably fix in the VB6 code if it's
Okay.
what we would do in the migration is right now we have things split across lots of files. Like we have one file per year for the detail. We have different detail files for different companies. In SQL Server, there's no reason not to load all of that data into a table and have just, instead of having those things be identified by their name on the disk, have them identified by an additional column in the table with the identifier. And that would make reporting easier to do and also improve its performance. And those columns on the Access version could just be there, much like we did the year, but they would still be separate files. So, but on the SQL Server, we could combine them. So, that's where we're leaning towards the database design, but we haven't gotten to that point yet, because we're looking at crop audit. And the other thing is, the transaction detail itself, there's several improvements we can make there. It suffers from not using some direct relationships internally. For example, when you link transaction plus detail to a chemical, you don't have a specific column for linking it to a chemical. It's reuse to link to fertilizers and to link to this, link to that. And so from the database perspective, that link isn't particularly visible, isn't that usable. What we can do is split that into 5 columns so that we know specifically what you're referring to and know that there's a relationship between that column and the other table. So there's some stuff we can do to clean up the database design. And that helps also make certain types of reporting perform better. So, and also,
It's going to be easier for querying directly out of Access or SQL.
oh yes, it would also help a lot with people trying to generate their own queries. Because the query tools understand those relationships, but what they don't really understand is why you load 5 of them up in the same column. And again, that was done for space constraints. So we need to undo that. Anything else? Okay.
All right, thank you, Mark. Couldn't have ended it better by talking about space constraints. Thinking about space constraints, you think about the computers on the Apollo 11, how much, I understand you got about the same computing power as you have probably on a reading card. But they had to be very, very good programmers to compress that information with that technology. And that's basically how we started, with a 4K, 16K, not megabytes, not terabytes, but 16K computer, and be able to compress it. And so we're unwinding that as this information becomes free. So, appreciate you coming in, and we're looking forward to having a good time tonight.